Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation Anshe Emet. And joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter, Day School of Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, Anshe Chesed of New York City. We are recording this on day 769. Now that we are still in the ceasefire, four bodies remaining in Gaza, for uh, of Israelis who are the three Israelis and one Nepalese worker
He's tied.
whose body was
Many
abducted.
Godard, Ron Gvili, Dror Or, and Sudhi Sak Rinthalak, agricultural worker from Thailand.
And really, while the vast majority have been returned, we're still waiting for the completion of this moment, this phase. Anyway, we are recording this on this day, and we're turning to Parshat Hayyei Sarah, which is such a lovely parsha, and not the beginning of it. The beginning of it, the beginning of it is just a record of the death of Sarah, with a lot of interpretive questions in the account of her death. This remarkable exchange between Abraham and Ephron the Hittite in acquiring the burial place and insisting that he pay really quite a formidable sum for this piece of land, a piece of land that will eventually become uh, a holy spot or a place of pilgrimage throughout Jewish history in the city of Hebron. But moving to chapter 24, which takes up the most of this parsha, we have the the transition of generations setting in, and we need to turn to that to really see what Abraham is thinking here. So the part that chapter starts with Vavraham Zakein, Baba Yamim. Abraham is old, advanced in years. Vadonai berachet Avraham bakol, and God has blessed everything with God has blessed Abraham with everything. To which my oppositional defiance disorder kicks in and says, "Really? Has God blessed Abraham with everything? If God had blessed Abraham with everything, then everything would be set. Everything would be in motion
It
here."
goes it goes beyond that because let's face it. What's the previous chapter about? The death of Sarah. So now that Sarah's dead, Abraham is blessed with everything.
I
It's a
agree with
curious
you.
line to follow her death.
Absolutely. So
But I
yes.
use this verse to mark the burial of Omer Nutra at the beginning of the week, or I got maybe last week. And I think that the significance is that even after death, there can be blessing. In the moment of death, we often think that our world has completely come to an end and nothing will be good again. And the truth of the matter is, life does go on and we can regain a sense of blessing. Perhaps we need God's help, and maybe that is the import of the verse.
Okay. So there are lots of different vectors to go in with that blessing, or with the sense that Abraham's life is blessed. It can't be complete yet. And um, the completion is that there's continuity. Look, Abraham's job isn't really done. God promised him that he would have the land. Okay, so he's in the land. And God promised him that he would be, a father of great nations. And right now, all he's got is Yitzchak, to whom the covenant is going. Ishmael is out of the picture. So he really doesn't have much. So Abraham, being Abraham, has to set the thing in motion. So I'm
Yeah,
turning to.
there's a. I didn't really think about this before we started this conversation, and the oppositional defiance disorder, prompted me a little bit to say that maybe the story is set up in this way. First of all, Abraham Zara Zakenim Bayim Bayamim. We already heard this phrase about applied to Abraham and Sarah, the childless couple. But then the Berach Bakol gave them everything. This lovely midrash blessed Abraham Bakol. He had a daughter. Her name was Bakol.
Yeah.
And there's another the same passage in the Gemara says He blessed him with everything that he didn't have a daughter because God knows what
Right, that was Rebbe Meir.
God knows what would happen to her. Um, but maybe the story is of somebody who has everything but nothing because
So,
he just got paid. He's wealthy enough to to perhaps extravagantly overpay for a cave. He has 400 shekel kesef. That is not his last 400 pieces of silver. He's not plunged himself into poverty. He's got a lot of stuff. He's got a lot of wealth. He's got so many shepherds that his nephew slash brother-in-law. He's got so many sheep that his nephew slash brother-in-law had to depart from him because they were just eating up all the grass. He's got everything. You know what? He doesn't have peace of mind. He doesn't have
well,
progeny. He doesn't have the things that are the deep satisfaction.
what I'd like to add two things. First of all, in this the midrash about Abraham's blessing being not having a daughter, we have to ask why that is. And the reason that's given is because he would have no one to marry her off to. And one of the things that we often overlook when we tell the story of Breshit is that the patriarchs have almost entirely males because it's easier to bring a female into the family and make her one of yours than to bring a man in and make him one of yours.
Certainly in the patriarchal culture of the day, it was that was
Right.
that was really
And
standard.
so I think there's something to that. The other thing that I think we have to keep in mind is God has made Abraham a promise, but when is the promise fulfilled? It would seem to me that the promise can only be fulfilled when Isaac himself has children, because given the history of Sarah, who was barren for 90 years, you have to wonder if marriage is going to be enough for Isaac to have children. And in fact, in the story, I guess next week, we find out that Rebekah has the family curse, so to speak, of barrenness.
Well, that's how I read the little passage at the end of last week's parsha, which is the genealogy of the family back in Haran, Nahor's family, and why is the Torah giving us this list of people? Well, literally, it's giving us this list because we get identified in this list, Betuel, and Betuel Yaladet Rivka, Rivka, the daughter of Betuel. She's named there. But what's important there is that the Nahor is by having this number of children through all sorts of different combinations is really established. I believe there's 12 in there, 12 names in there, and that really signals he's on his way. Whereas Abraham is not on his way. Abraham only has one, maybe, he has two, one out of Sarah, the wife, and one out of Hagar, the handmaiden. Um, and there's no
Fail to
nation
tell.
there. Not only that, but we know the story, how the story unfolds. Isaac is not going to have more than two, and of the two, Jacob and Esav. Jacob is the one that spends a lot of time outside the country. Esav, who marries, the some local women. He is not favored. So it's not until Jacob that we get the proliferation of the tribes. Jacob's the one that is really holding the torch, so to speak, from God's blessing to Abraham, God's promise to Abraham. It's not until Jacob that the family really becomes a family. Okay, and it's in that sense that Abraham wants to get things moving here. And I sense the urgency, and we should go to the next verse here. God blesses everything with God blesses Abraham with everything except not descendants. And so Abraham's at the point where he says, "Well, I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait for God to marry off my son. No, I got to get things moving, and that's characteristic of Abraham. Abraham is always taking matters into his own hands. We saw that with the famine way at the beginning of the story, where it's a famine. He says, "I have to live." Goes down to Egypt, etc. Hagar, Sarah also takes matter into her own hands and gives Abraham Hagar as a wife. So here Abraham turns to his servant, unnamed here, but a servant. We identify him always as Eliezer, And why not?
I have an idea though why he's unnamed
Yeah.
based on that second verse because it says Vayomer Avraham El Avdo Zakan Beito Hamoshel B'chol Asher Lo. So if we replace Abraham with God, then this describes Abraham. Abraham is God's trusted servant, and this servant is Abraham's trusted servant. And so there's a nice parallel between God and Abraham. So Abraham is actually doing God's work with God's consent.
Okay. I just want to ask the question, again, the theatrical impulse is motivated here. This is a relationship, this man and this servant, and just populating Abraham's life right now. No Sarah, of course. There wasn't much of Sarah before that, but that's beside the point. Abraham was living in Beersheba, and she is living in Hebron. No Sarah, she's died. Um, no son, Isaac, either. He's not on the stage right now. No Ishmael, he's not on the stage. We have a retinue of all of these shepherds and his possessions and slaves and maidservants, etc., but nobody really important. And we have this guy. He's named elsewhere as Eliezer, but here he's Eved Avraham, and he is Zikan Beto. He is the elder of his household. Hamoshel b'chol asher lo, the guy who's in charge of everything, who runs everything. Um, and that's the really so I'm not saying are I want to ask, are they equals, expecting an obvious answer, but what's the relationship, or how would you see their relationship?
Between Abraham and the
And
Eved.
this guy, yeah, I
Well,
yeah,
touching.
touching.
Well, especially when he makes the oath. Yeah, of course.
Well,
It's a
the
look.
servant is incredibly devoted. I was we before we started recording, we looked at the very tail end of the parasha, Vayugadla Avraham, and it was told to Abraham that Milcah had children um, to Nahor, his brother. Milcah and Nahor have children, including Betuel, and Betuel is going to be uh, Rivka's
Wow.
father. Um, and I was thinking a couple of things. First of all, I was thinking that okay, they were probably Vayugad Lavam. It was told to Abraham. They were probably messengers between different communities up and down the routes of travel and trade, and nobody sent emails, and there wasn't what they didn't post it on Twitter. So somebody came from Mesopotamia and said, and Haran, which is in the very it's the Turkish Syrian border, the very southern part of Turkey, northern part of Syria right now. That's way up in the north of Mesopotamia. And so what was that, like a month? Was it 3 weeks journey? I don't know, but somebody came and they carried with them probably, let's just say, a whole mess of, walnuts and spices and whatever kinds of commodities and a lot of news. And so then the guy comes down and says, who are you? And says, well, my name is Abraham ben Terach. Oh, I know your cousin, and I'll tell you something about happened to your cousin. And then you go up to Mesopotamia, or you send a messenger up to Mesopotamia, and that's itself a long journey. And you are as likely as not to find that since you got that message and was got brought down to Canaan, and then you go all the way back up, that somebody has died of a heart attack or has been, bitten by a snake. Well, like you cannot assume that, oh my God, my cousin had a baby. I'm going to fly to Israel to meet them. So why does not Abraham say to his servant, listen, Isaac's got a new cousin. We'd like you to go find Rivka. He doesn't say those things because there may be multiple reasons why, but one effect of him not saying something is he said to the servant, listen, I'm going to tell you something. I need you to go someplace. It's really far away. Lots of dangerous stuff can happen on the way. I have absolutely no idea what you're going to find when you're there. And he goes with such diligence and such, it's a big hard ask. It's a heavy lift that Abraham has asked him, and the servant is, Yado ki yad rabo. He is really Abraham's representative. He is fully his master's, representative. He's his agent. And that's pretty trusting on Abraham and trustworthy on the servant's part.
So I want to pick up on one thing that you said, which is, do you or ask it in the question, which is, do you think he is telling the servant to go get this specific daughter that is named in the list? Or do you think he is saying to the servant, look, take someone from that ethnic stock, that area, that's where I come from. That's where I want you to go. It would be the equivalent of, let's say, a generation, or well, it would be the
I know
equivalent of
exactly a generation ago. I want you to marry somebody from Minsk. I'm
exactly,
yeah.
or in my case, I want you to, take my kids and say, I want you to marry someone from, I don't know, Ontario.
Well, even no, you would have to say like it's like it's a little bit. This is now just being facetious, not about the Torah. I find it charming and kind of absurd, like all the landsmanshaften that created the various cemeteries. And you go
Yeah.
into cemeteries, and this is the Vitebsker Society, and this is the Beitzer Society, and this is the Zhytomyr Society. And when those people came from Eastern Europe to the United States, they seriously thought that the identity of their towns was going to remain central in their families' lives, which is absurd because those people were lucky enough to remain Jewish, let alone attached to the fact that their great grandfather came from Vitebsk.
But
Right, but you only know that later. You don't know that
Of
at the time.
course, of course, you're forgiven for not foreseeing that. But in this case, it may be that Abraham says, "Listen, Haran, that's my place. I'm a Haranian, and I want you to go bring me some Haran, and 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 if it turns out to be my niece and Isaac's cousin, then I'm going to know for absolute sure that the divine hand was at work. And boy, oh boy, is that auspicious.
So I think it's important to separate out the story from the narrative art of the story. And I think, we have an anonymous servant in part so that the focus remains on Abraham. Rivka isn't singled out by Abraham so that the focus remains on Rivka, but also on God. Because otherwise, if Abraham tells the servant, go find my niece or whatever, then there's no divine action. So I think that there's a great deal of literary artistry in this particular parsha. And one of the observations that comes to mind is that this story is to isolate Isaac. His father dies, his mother dies, his brother goes, all of his brothers are going to leave. So at the end of the parsha, the only person on the scene is Isaac with Rivka. And that will set the scene for next week. And we've talked at some length about Isaac being the weakest of the three patriarchs. And Jeremy's favorite candidate for patriarch number two is the matriarch Rivka. And but it has to be Isaac. So this Parsha is going to take everyone away from Isaac so he can stand in the limelight.
I don't want to. I just want to differ slightly and say that maybe he's anonymous because he's just such a remarkable character. Okay, I
The
almost
servant.
want the servant. I love this servant. I've talked about it before. That of all the minor characters in the Bible, he's really the most extraordinary. He's such a gifted negotiator, talker, storyteller. He's a wonderful storyteller. And he always reminds me of the Sancho Panza to Don Quixote, the Abraham Don Quixote. The point that I'm trying to make is that I want the spin-off series with this character. I want this character to be successful and to go back and he does come back and he's off the stage afterwards because he there's that one moment at the end of the story which is so beautiful in its subtlety, which he says, when Isaac is in the field and uh, Rebecca turns to, who is that? And he says, "This is my master. This is my master." And so, in one stroke, he has done the transition, and he said, "My master is now him." And what that means is that he 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 um he has deftly made the transition to Isaac, uh, and we don't see him anymore. So
Can
So
you
that
elaborate when you said the gifted storyteller, and of course that's true. Tell us a little bit about the really unparalleled structure of this chapter. I think it's the longest chapter,
the
certainly
longest
longest.
chapter in
in
Genesis,
Bereshit,
certainly.
Yeah.
as long
Look,
as chapter in Bereshit.
we don't have time to go through it, and I don't have I would love to do it on the chart and whatever. I'll just give you one example, which is that the thing happens, the whole setup, the way he describes the way I would focus, for example, as he sits outside the town. Okay, so maybe we've talked about it in the past, but they make the oath that he drives out to Haran, and I'm looking at verse 11. Okay, Vayavrech hagemalim michutz la'ir. He gets the camels to sit, put them down outside of the city, El Be'er Hamayim, near the well, Le'et Erev, at night, or near
Evening.
dusk, Le'et Tzet HaShoavot, at the time of the going out of the drawers of water. And I think, well, that's brilliant. What a brilliant idea. That's brilliant. Why? Because it's nighttime, and nighttime is vulnerability. And he knows something about the customs of that place because he must have done research. He must have done a little question. When do they come out? Well, when would they come out? They're coming out at before dusk to draw the evening water. We live with a faucet, so we don't have to worry about drawing water from a well before night. But at
And with
nighttime, nobody,
artificial light also, don't
exactly,
forget.
Yeah,
nobody,
right.
nobody's going to go out to a well at night. It's dangerous. It's cold, whatever. So they're all going at sunset to get the water, and it's the women who are going out. Okay, so he sets up this scene where he's waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, and he makes himself vulnerable, which is in need of, like, this is your guest, and this is the Middle East, and you need the custom of hospitality, and that's exactly what he's doing, and that's brilliant. So when he says, uh, he makes his prayer, let the woman, be the one that is the one who offers me and my camels. It's a little bit of or a challenge, and then he sees her, and he I'm going to fast forward to the middle of the story, which is he says, this is who we are. We gives her the jewelry. She runs back to the family. They bring him in, they invite him in, they sit him down to a feast. And my favorite line in the whole story is when he says to them, you know uh, they put food before him, and he says, I'm not going to eat until I say my piece. And they say, daber, speak. And on it goes. It's just like the geyser flows out, and he talks and talks and talks and talks, and it's a great story. And in that story, he subtly manipulates everybody. I'll give you one example where the example is that Abraham said, go to my ethnic area, go to Artzi Umalati, my land and my birthplace. And the servant subtly changes it to go to my mishpacha and go to my father's household.
So I think it's important to recognize that his father's household is what is moved. He's not going back to the land of his birth. He doesn't send the servant to Ur Kasdim. He sends him to Haran. And what's unspoken here is, when does Abraham actually fulfill the Lech Lecha, when he's told to leave his birthplace, his father's house, the land of his origin, because he can't escape his family yet. He has to keep going back, and his family has to keep going back because Yaakov will go back in 2 generations, because he can't completely separate himself
Well, I
from
just let me interrupt you. Just you make an important point, which is that Abraham tells him to go back to the birthplace, and the servant goes back to the family. He doesn't go
right.
back to the
Well,
Well,
this
to
is
the
birthplace.
this is
father's
a this is
house.
Yeah.
this is a we discussed this, I think, a couple of weeks ago. The Rashi and Ibn Ezra machloket about this. Um, Rashi thinks that his birthplace is Haran because Terach has made the journey. Terach left Ur Kasdim first and reached as far as Haran, set up housekeeping, and the children were born there. Ibn Ezra thinks that uh, that Abraham's birthplace is Ur Kasdim, and Terach is essentially a mind, even though it says that Terach left Ur Kasdim and made it to Haran, that he's really just along on Abraham's ride. So we can't really, not that I would just, be the decider between Rashi and Ibn Ezra, but if I wanted to argue Rashi's side of the equation, then I would say that he did go back to the birthplace, and it is Haran. So you would. It seems like there's at
Okay.
a minimum, an ambiguity in the Tanakh, and at a maximum, like two separate tales, one of which regards each of those places as the birthplace.
Right. But I think Rashi is dealing, his answer seems to me a little bit forced. I think the Pasha shot is that his birthplace is Ur Kasdim, because I think that's the cleanest reading of the text.
Well,
I
certainly,
mean, that's me.
that's Nehemiah, right? We say it in the Shacharit.
Right. But some, yes.
It's
We're running out of time here. Let's fast forward right to the end. I have a question that I want to ask you to because I've been stumped on this. So at the end of the story, after all this talk, lots and lots of talk, lots of God, lots of swearing to God and thanking God and whatever. So the two of them meet. She falls off the camel and she covers herself, and then look at verse 66. Vayisaper Eved liYitzchak, the servant tells Isaac everything at Kol HaDvarim Asher Asa. He gives him the whole story. Then, quiet. Vayeviyeha Yitzchak ha'ohel Sarah imo. Isaac brings her into his mother's tent. Vayikach et Rivka, he takes Rivka. Vatehi lo liisha, he takes her as his wife. Vayeaveh, he loves her. Vayinachem Yitzchak acharei imo, and he's comforted after his mother. And we can talk a lot about that. But I want to say is, he doesn't say anything. And what do you think he should say or is saying, or what's not in the text? Why is he silent here? What do you think is going on here? And maybe, flesh it out in your own
So
imaginations. Go ahead.
when was the last time Isaac spoke?
Exactly. At that
He was
cave.
8 years old.
He was 8 years old and he said, where's the sheep?
And it may be that his response to the Akedah is silence. And
Okay.
it's only after he meets Rivka that he can talk again.
Nice.
That's lovely. I tend to, certainly more than you guys, I tend to read the Torah in like big situational things and tend not to feel that they convey consistent character portraits. Except this case, I'm going to say that there's something sweet, gentle, unsophisticated about Isaac. Um, he's he is inarticulate. There's nothing particular, but he does love her, and he feels some comfort. We have to ask Dr. Freud what he thinks about his wife
Sure.
taking the
Sure.
place of his mother. But he loves Esav, and he loves having lunch with Esav, and he loves how Esav's clothing smells. And there's something just very
You know,
sweet.
he's a kind of a country boy,
He's a
right? He's not a city person.
vulnerable. Yeah, there's something vulnerable and sweet about Isaac's capacity for love that abuts. I don't mean it sounds a little sexy when I mean this, but I don't mean that. Um, there's something sensual about sounds and smells and fields that is really kind of nice.
Very nicely put.
And Isaac will also, when Rivka is struggling with infertility, as all the biblical matriarchs do, Isaac goes to speak to God and says, "Cut her a break," and God says, "Okay." There's something tender about Isaac in that respect.
He is
He's
contemplative.
empathic.
He's the most so maybe he doesn't need to speak. You
He's a
know,
patriarch of empathy.
right? As much as I want, a little more drama, dialogue, or whatever, I think that the silence here is really the point, and that it takes me, the reader, into his mind and into his heart, and this relationship of all the patriarchal relationships is the one that is going to be the most textured in terms of certainly the character of Rebekah, and this relationship will have a real set of stories to it that are beautiful and poignant and also very, very moving, to which we will move next week as we conclude our discussion this week. We want to thank our viewers, listeners for watching and listening to us. We're honored that you're spending the time with us. This is, just a joy to do this. And we'll see you next week on the next edition of Parsha. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Bye bye.